The cause of the conflict is top-up fees, whereby university students will have to pay for their own education, picking up a bill of perhaps up to £21,000 a year in the process, which £21,000, that is, in the process, which they'll have to repay once they start earning £15,000 a year. Minister, you think clobbering young people with massive debt is the best way to attract more of them to go to university?
Well, let's start by putting right something that you said, which was not totally correct. They will be paying a contribution towards the cost of their teaching. Even if we get to the stage where a student will be expected a contribution up to this cap of 3,000, which will not be in every university and not be for every course, even then, if one takes something like modern languages, that'll probably meet about half the cost of teaching those courses averaged across the country.
But they will still be acquiring debt, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, 20, 21,000, in some cases conceivably more than that by your own account. You think that's going to attract people and say, terrific, wow, let's go to university?
No, we all recognise that debt is one of the issues and we do worry about it. But we've had to try and square a very, very difficult circle. Universities desperately need more money, and the government is putting more money into the system, an 18% real terms increase over the spending review period. But even that is not enough to deal with the legacy of underinvestment, with larger class student staff sizes, dilapidated buildings, poor equipment, and our ability to compete globally, which we now have to do, and attract and keep the best brains in Britain.
Okay,
so we've had to bring more money into the system.
OK, more money has to get into the system, Mandy Telford. Instead of whinging about a loan for the terrific privilege that you get as students, why not say thanks?
Because currently, at this moment in time, students have never been poorer. They're facing record levels of debt. Some of them graduating with £12,000, some a lot more than that. Students have to work during their degree. They're not getting what they can out of their studies. Now, if you triple tuition fees and you come out with a debt of £21,000, that's really going to saddle students throughout their degree and then their first first job they get with an awful lot of debt. And in fact, it was the government's own watchdog, the Audit Committee, that said debt and hardship are the biggest reasons that deter students from going to university.
Can I come back on?
Go on.
Mandy knows that we do worry about debt, but I hope that she will welcome some of the things that we've put in place to attract people from whatever background, according to their talent, not money, into higher education. For example, there's nobody has to pay their fee up front.
That's an advantage, you don't have to pay the fee up front, isn't it? For many families, that they don't have to pay the individual student until they've got a wage, a decent wage.
It's a step in the right direction, but not if you triple fees back end.
Let me go on. Secondly, we've reintroduced grants for the really poor students, and I hope that's something else that the NUS and Mandy welcome. Third, we've said that nobody has to start paying back before they're earning £15,000, and then it's income contingent. So if you're earning £20,000, you pay far, far less back of your loan than if you're earning £50,000. And the fourth thing we've said is that this is an real interest-free loan. So you will only ever pay back what you borrow. And putting that all together as a package...
Let's be clear about that last thing, because people can be misled and think, well, if I borrow 20,000, in 10, 20 years' time, I'll only be paying back £20,000. You'll only be paying back the equivalent of £20,000, which could, in fact, be 25, 30, £40,000. Whatever inflation... Well, it depends what inflation does.
Jonathan, can I just say one further thing so that people understand the system? We got rid of the upfront payment of fees. That immediately means that the debt is increased. So by by introducing a change, which I think most students welcome, that does add to the debt. And the final thing I want to say is we do recognise the worries about debt, but over their lifetime, graduates do earn far, far more than somebody without a degree. So asking graduates to put back something into the system which they personally have benefited from, we think is a fair balance between the state putting money in and the graduate who individually gets something out of it back in.
Ted Ragg, you spent most of your life dealing with parents, school children, students, graduates. How do you rate the proposition?
Well, I'm appalled by it. I mean, as Neil Kinnock would have said, I'm appalled that a Labour government is actually going to charge a very large sum of money for something that should be people's birthright, higher education. And it's all very well. However it's dressed up, it still amounts to the same thing. Even if a bit is knocked off here, a bit knocked off there, it's still a large sum of money.
You don't like it in principle. Do you think in practice it will deter, which is the key issue? Or will people say, this is round our neck, it is an albatross, we don't like it, but we still know the benefit is there and we'll take it?
No, it will deter people, and it'll deter the very people that the government's other policies are trying to get into higher education. And I think the evidence for that is quite clear. And what is more, you could put forward the same arguments for charging people for operations, because after all you could say, well, they'll be cured, therefore they'll work, and therefore they'll earn more money. What can't you charge for? And the other thing that I take greatest exception to is the huge exaggeration of what gets called the graduate premium. This generation of graduates is going to be nothing like as well off as is being said. That OECD figure of £400,000 is completely bogus.
That is the £400,000 figure. Just hold on. That £400,000 figure is the figure that's been used as the additional extra earning over average earnings that graduates get. It isn't any longer a relevant figure, is it?
Oh yes, it is, and it's not based on OECD figures. It's based on analysis of current labour force data. So, and all the evidence we have is because of the demand in the labour market over the next decade for people with higher education qualifications, whether it's degree or sub-degree, there is no evidence to suggest that premium will go. Can I just come back on, Ted, on one thing? Because I would love to be in a position to say that education right through one's lifetime is free. But if you're sitting where I am, Ted...
As a Labour politician...
Hang on. If you're sitting where I am, where you know there's been fantastic underinvestment for a generation in schools, in primary schools and secondary schools, no investment before we came into government in a serious investment in nursery education. If you look at the demands across government from health, from transport, I think what will always happen is higher education will never be at the top of people's list on that. So when you're making judgments about the relative importance, relative demand on public spending of these things, yes, we need to put more money into higher education, and we are, the 18% increase.
So it's not a good in itself, it's you have to do it because other people need the money.
Well, the answer to Ted, if we wanted to totally free, is to go back to the system that he and I were part of. When I went 6 or 7%, at that level, the state paid for the lot. When we want to get to 50%, it's incredibly expensive and the burden needs to be shared.
I must dismantle this complete misapprehension about £400,000 or its equivalent. First of all, it's predicated on an elite system when 4 or 5% of people...
Ted.
Well, it must be
it's
because
they've... It's on current data.
No, it can't be.
I'm sorry, and we're not any longer in a position where you and I were part of it.
No, I must be allowed to dismantle this, please,
already
Margaret,
now,
because
we're
let him
you
just
keep reasserting the same myth. It's not based on that. You have to know what people have earned towards the end of their career. These were people who went through an elite system. Secondly, it was at a time when relatively few women went to university. Women have interrupted careers. Thirdly, we're talking about 50% maybe going to higher education, not a small number. And all these figures have been worked out as if there's going to be a huge premium. My guess is, and I may be wrong, but my guess is that, first of all, if there is a premium, it'll be relatively slight. And secondly, it's not inconceivable in the 21st century economy, with footballers earning millions, pop stars earning millions, plumbers often being better paid than graduates, that there's no premium at all, or even that you're slightly less well off because you work in public service.
Quickly on that.
Well, the only thing Ted and I will not agree, what we have said about the premium is based on current data, not past data, and our best analysis of where the labour market is going over the next decade suggests that the premium will be maintained. If it's not, let me just put this final point, Jonathan, if it's not, and he's right that graduates don't earn as much as we think they will, graduates will not be asked to pay back more of their debt than they can afford to, because it's an income contingent debt repayment system that we're introducing.
Let me move on to another point that Ted Ragg raised. It's bizarre, isn't it, for a Labour government to introduce a scheme that'll make it even more expensive for the poorest student to get into a top university charging £3,000.
It won't be more expensive for the poorest student to get into the university because we're abolishing upfront fees and we're introducing maintenance grants. It will be be more expensive for the graduate with a debt to pay back that money. But the assertion is, Jonathan, let me just
pick you up on the figures. These are some simple figures.
Yep.
There's a maintenance grant that's going to be reintroduced worth £1,000.
Yep.
There was the fee, which was £1,100.
Yep. Which was remitted
remitted for them. So
yep.
you're giving them, in effect, £2,100.
Yep.
If my mathematics are not wrong, if you're paying £3,000 to go to a top university, as a very bright, very poor student might wish to do, it is going to be more expensive in the future when this scheme comes into force than it is now. So you're more likely to deter the very poorest, who are the ones you most want to get into university.
Well, let me go back on it again. We're not
Are my figures right?
Your figures are correct on the presumption that every university will charge
No,
3,000.
I said top universities.
Okay.
The top 20, maybe 40. We know that others may well go up that scale as well.
Well, the answer to you has to be twofold. All the evidence we have to date suggests that debt is only one of the factors that is preventing our brightest most talented kids from going on to university. The other factors.
But you're making that particular factor bigger.
Well,
aren't you?
At present, people come out with a debt of about £10,000. That's the current regime. That, our experience shows us, has not been an inhibitor to access for kids from working class backgrounds.
I'm asking specifically about the poorest kids, which you claim to care about most of all. I'm saying to you that factor, which is the cost of going to the university, you are going to make a greater hurdle for them.
Our evidence demonstrates that the factors that really prevent working class kids from going to any university or top universities is their prior attainment at school, which is why we need to get school performance up, and their aspirations. Not enough children aim higher. On the issue of debt, which you quite rightly raise, and we know is a concern, what we're saying there is that nobody's being asked to pay up front when they're poor. They're being asked to pay back when they're graduate and when they're earning.
Chris Woodhead, I guess because it's a market system or a greater market system being introduced, on the whole you rather favour, rather remarkable thought, but you rather favour what the government is doing with top-up fees, even if it does create a few problems with debt.
It is a remarkable thing that I tend to agree with what the Minister's been saying, yes.
Good old free market thinking now in a Labour government.
Yeah, up to a point. Of course, it's contaminated by the access regulations that we're going to discuss later. But yeah, if there is an advantage from getting a degree, and we can discuss the amount of that advantage, but there is some advantage, then I think people should pay something towards the extra money that they're going to earn over their income.
Let me bring in some of our audience here who are, I was going to say, gagging to come in and say things. Let me start with the guy right on the edge here in the third row back.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, many of the members of the current government have come through this higher education system when the system of maintenance grants was in place. Will you be retrospectively contributing to your own educations?
I recognise the enormous advantages I had from free education. Equally, times have changed. When I went, 6-7% of the population went to university. Now we're at 43%, hoping to rise to 50%. The costs of doing that are just very, very different. Let me just say another thing is one of our proposals in the white paper, which hasn't got much coverage, is we do think that universities have to build up their own endowment funds. And we are going to look at a number of mechanisms which would make sure that people like me, who got all the benefits from an undergraduate degree, will actually have the opportunity to choose to contribute back into the university sector.
But you've escaped, you yourself, like I and others here, have escaped that net.
Yes, it was a different time.
The woman who, right in the second row there with the black sweater on, you had your hand up just a second ago. Who are you? Yes.
Yeah, as you were saying, in your time only 6 or 7% people went to uni. These days, so many more people have got degrees that employers are expecting us to have, you know, postgraduate qualifications as well. Now, I've already got so much debt. I'm graduating this year. I'm deciding to go back to France, where I spent last year as part of my degree, because there it's done on merit and not money. Firstly, last year in France, the French government paid 1/3 of my rent. I didn't pay any fees, and granted, I'll have to, you know, pass a tough examination to go and do my postgrad there. But once I pass that, I won't have to pay fees, and I probably won't come back to this country.
And let me add to that, most people's view that the transport system is better in France out of public spending. The health system, we send most of our sick people to France nowadays in order they get treatment on time. So it's not, if the French can do it, why can't you?
Well, the first thing to say is that our system is based on merit and not money. And one of the reasons we're going to talk about the access regulator is that that is one of the ways that we can ensure that it is merit, not money, which determines who gets access. The second thing to say is we have a selective system of supporting postgraduates in the UK now. There are bursaries that come through all the research councils. We've put them up now. We've put them up. Again, it's not enough, but we're making progress. So the third thing to say, Jonathan, if we could get the whole of a 25-year legacy of underinvestment in the whole of the public sector right in 5 or 6 years, we'd have done a miracle. We've made huge progress in the right direction. We've got a long, long way still to go.
You buy that?
For me to do a postgrad here, it'll cost me £4,000 just for the fees.
To where?
I'll have to take, I want to, plus the maintenance, for my living expenses, so £10,000 for 1 year. And I just think it's too much.
Okay.
Over there,
go on.
can you imagine the French government were paying my rent and my government won't even help me?
But hang on a minute. What you said to me is to go to a French university, you have to go through some very, very tough access regime. To go to British university as a postgraduate, there are thousands of bursaries available through the research councils and others, and that is a way. That is a way of. It is limited, but it is in France by the exam you have to do. It's limited in both countries.
The man on the edge here, in the third row back, right on the edge. You with glasses.
Yeah. Margaret, Minister, you're defending the indefensible, in my opinion. Thank God I went to the university when I did, because I would not be able to go today. Granted, universities need the money, but I see no way that many students, exactly the students you want to get into university, are going to be able to afford to pay back what they're going to have to pay back. It's frightening.
Well, can I come back and ask you, what would you do? What would you do in the situation where we know universities are incredibly underfunded and we need to have more people going through universities, and we need the very strong research infrastructure because of the new products and services that leads to? What would you do?
Let me say, there are things in the white paper I do agree with. This particular thing I don't. But I would, in fact, I would put up income tax by a penny in the pound.
Can I bring in the woman behind you wearing the blue top?
I'd like to ask Margaret Hodge about a vision 10, 15, 20 years in the future, when the graduates who have had these top-up fees and now paying back their debts have children of their own. Now, I think we all accept that parents have a very important role in supporting their children in their education. I'd like to ask her how these parents of the future might possibly have the option to either take a less demanding job for a while, perhaps work part-time, or perhaps even stay at home with their children if they're having to be forced to pay back their top-up fees.
No, well, can I just again explain the system as it'll work? You will only pay back a proportion of your income depending on what you earn. And the reason that we've gone for a zero real interest rate, which means that it'll only keep, the real terms value.
Inflation.
The reason we've done that is precisely to meet the point of women taking career breaks, people deciding to do postgraduate.
What happens when you've taken your career break, and then when your children are old enough, you go back, you still have this debt hanging around you, you'll still be hopefully paying for a mortgage, your pension. What's going to happen to these people?
The mortgage too is the money you can get. The size of mortgage you can get will be affected by, if you're a graduate, not by the mortgage companies saying, well, they're having to pay back so much on this salary, Jonathan, you can't have such a large mortgage.
Jonathan, that's just not true. Currently, students are leaving universities. All these people who have chosen to go to university, the undergraduates here and postgraduates here, are all leaving university with about a £10,000 debt. That's under the current regime. It could go up, but that's what it currently is. There is no inhibitor there to access to mortgage funds.
I wasn't suggesting there was an inhibitor to access to mortgage. What I'm suggesting is that the mortgage company, and I think anyone in here will know it, of course they don't take off the £10,000, but they say, how much are you paying back each week that you have to pay back, and that affects the mortgage.
Well, the evidence is that hasn't happened so far. And can I just come back on something else? A lot of people see it as a debt. When you buy your home, as many of you will do, and you take out a loan for that through the mortgage. Most of us see that as an investment. And I think the same thing is true about education. When you decide to go through university, you may see it as a sort of burdensome debt. I see it as an incredibly good investment, not just in life enhancement, but in the extra money you can earn. And can I just come back on the 1%? I just wish even 1% on income tax would pay the bill that we're looking at. Can I say to you, 1% on income tax for 7 years would have just given Oxford and Cambridge enough to have the same endowment fund as Harvard currently has.
Persuaded, Mandy?
No, not really. The argument about the house, if I want to buy a house, it's up to me what sort of house I buy, how much I pay on it, what sort of mortgage I want. If I want to go to university and better myself and get a good job, then that's not up to me how much it's going to cost me forever. But I'd like to come back on this. I'd like to come back on this point about the student loan. Are you expecting it to be completely free? Can I come back on the student loan, on the loans at the £15,000 threshold? Yes, it's been raised from £10,000 and we think that's good. However, we believe that you should be only paying back once you have financially benefited from your higher education. And at £15,000, you can't say you've financially benefited. We believe it should be up at £25,000 above the average graduate wage.
I'm going to pause there if we may, because you're going to repeat the point that you made before. So we'll just take a little pause there. We're going to move on next, look more closely, we've touched on it, access, at the role of the so-called access regulator. Minister, if the regulator is to do what the government wants effectively, then he'll expect the top universities to accept students from deprived backgrounds, even though their grades may be worse than others?
No, that is absolutely not what we're saying. There has been concern, in fact we've just spent the first half of the programme talking about it, that by introducing variable fees we will limit the inclusion of people from low-income backgrounds, non-traditional backgrounds into university. That's why we've established the regulator. What the regulator will do will work with the universities to ensure that they have admissions processes in place that provide a fair level playing field. So our most talented, brightest and best kids do get the opportunity of going to university on merit, as somebody said, and not on money.
Chris Woodhead, you like the top-up fees. You've got a quibble here or there. You probably like bigger top-up fees, more market play. Sounds a good idea, doesn't it?
No, I think what the Minister's just said is both paternalistic and twaddle. It's paternalistic because the universities should be doing what they think right, and it's twaddle because either the university is being expected to admit more students from disadvantaged backgrounds or it's not. Supposing you find that the university hasn't got the processes in place and because of that students from disadvantaged homes aren't being admitted, what then? For me, the only factor that matters with regard to university admission is intellectual merit. The home that the child went to, the school that they attended is neither here nor there. The problem, of course, with university admissions isn't the failure of the university to take seriously the issue of access, it's the failure of schools to prepare, as you yourself said earlier in the programme, students for the demands of university life.
You can't have it both ways. You can't guarantee that more students, as the point, get into university from deprived backgrounds, can you, without discriminating in their favour?
Well, the present system in itself, we have worries and concerns about it because there are various studies, the latest one coming from Warwick, which suggests that the universities that, for example, look at the only attainment mark that we've got at the moment, A-levels, if they just look at that as the only criteria for admission into university, they will tend to discriminate in favour of those young people who come from private schools at the expense of people from state schools. Whereas if you actually looked at potential rather than attainment, you'd succeed in getting the brightest in.
Right. Well, let me on that.
If I can explain that, it's a difficult thing to explain, but there are now 3 studies around that looked at people coming out of state schools and private schools with exactly the same A-levels going into university. And what those 3 studies found is that the ones from state schools performed better at universities with the same A-levels to start with than those from private schools. What that suggests to us is that A-levels alone of measuring potential is not enough. And that's why we're looking with interest at a whole range of measures that universities are
But this is very important because what you're saying is that there is no reason why, in fact, you would rather like a university to accept someone from a deprived background which that university regards as having potential, the kid, even though that person's grades may be inferior to another student?
Well, there are all sorts of ways of doing it, and some of the universities look at the average score in a school and take the very best children in that school as being a better indicator of potential than a school which has a very high performance level and that child just performs at the average. We're not alone in doing this. In Texas, for example, they now do have a scheme where they take the top 10% from all their schools, give them admission into university, and because you're in the top 10%, that's seen as a good way of doing it.
So
there are other mechanisms, Jonathan.
No, just on these, because you've given some illuminating examples of Texas where it is clearly the case, and where it is clearly the case that they positively discriminate in favour of kids from deprived areas who they regard as having the talent, even though their grades are worse than the grades of other students.
What they positively do is hunt out the brightest and the best, and that's what we are attempting to do. We want the brightest and the best to have the opportunities
this is going
of
to go
universities
down,
as a whole.
This is going to go down like a lead balloon, is it not, with hard-working families who have, however sympathetic they may be to children from deprived areas, hard-working families who have scrimped and saved and encouraged and driven their children to get top grades because they've been told grades, grades, grades makes all the difference, to discover their child has been excluded from this or that top university because a place has been given to another child whose grades aren't quite as good.
Well, I've heard a lot of this, Jonathan, but let me equally say to you that I know from my own experience, and then since I've been higher education minister, of lots of young people who've come from, who've gone to state schools, who've done incredibly well in their A-levels, who haven't gained access to some of our top universities. And the reality there is simply that demand outstrips supply at our very top universities. What we're anxious to do is get a system that is better able to measure potential rather than just attainment.
I'm really rather, maybe others are now slightly confused, because you've been talking up the virtues of looking at other measures than grades, and you've cited in the past examples where this happens. When your boss, the Secretary of State, was asked what he thought about allowing into a university someone from a working class background with a lower grade than someone from a middle class background, what did he think? He said, "I'm against it. It would be," quotes, "a disaster." So is it a disaster or is it a beacon of light?
Whether it's using the American SATS exams, whether it's a sort of a test, a national test, whether even in one instance there's a university looking at psychometric testing, whether it's looking at the A-levels relative to the performance of the schools, there's a whole range of other ways of trying to measure potential. We haven't been good at it in the past. We want to in the future. Can I just come back on another point Chris made, that this will be seen as, I don't know, paternalistic or maternalistic, if it's me. But, and just say, there's public money going into the universities, and we need to be assured, as we were with you with Ofsted, that that public money is to put appropriate account. And if there is a fair and level playing field, universities will have absolutely nothing to fear from this new regulation.
Convinced, Chris Woodhead, by what you've just heard?
No, not convinced at all. I think it's the standard of the output that matters, not the nature of the intake processes.
But which output, Chris?
Which output? The quality of the degrees.
Quite.
And you have got a huge problem with your 50% target with regard to the erosion of the intellectual rigour of the degree.
Well, Ted Ragg, can you come to the, I put this in inverted commas, come to the Minister's rescue? Because you must favour this idea, surely, of having greater access for most deprived people from your standpoint.
I do, but I can only come to the Minister's rescue if she's honest about what this is going to be involved. And what it is going to involve, I have no doubt, is that some people with lower grades will be taken because of their background. Now, that is not unproblematic in the sense that many people would say poverty hurts. And if you've had a rotten time as a child, and if anybody believes poverty doesn't count, they should try it. But if you've no books in the home, you don't have any graduate parents, you don't have access to computers and so on, of course it counts. However, it's not an easy way to simply say, we will take people from poorer postcodes. I mean, already there's some evidence that the students who come from poorer postcodes are not necessarily less well off. There are better off people living in poorer postcode areas.
And you're modifying, or you want to modify that.
We take that point completely.
The other thing is the American... The other thing is the American experience, which is very important here. The best-known case is the Bakker case in the 1970s, where an American student sued a Californian medical school for taking people with lower grades than he himself had got on the grounds that it was an infringement of his civil rights. And there have been other cases as well. And these cases, the person suing has usually won, but there's always been an ambiguous judgment. Every one, if you look at those cases, they tend to say, yes, of course you've had your civil right removed and it shouldn't have happened. However, if universities want a balanced intake, they've got to try and do something.
Right. Pick up on that point in just a second, but come back to the first point that we dealt with there to make it absolutely clear. You're sort of charged with not quite coming clean by Ted Ragg on this. You yourself in the past have praised, amongst others, Bristol University because it awarded places to individuals from deprived areas, from schools that didn't perform very well, to people, quotes, with far lower A-level qualifications than normally required. Now, are you going to require or hope that the OFTOF will make that happen with top universities, or do you believe with your boss that that would be a disaster?
Jonathan, the reason you're accusing me of not coming clean is because this is a complicated matter. What I'm saying is we've got to get better at measuring potential, not outcome. Now, what Bristol, which is the university I talked about in the past, do is they look at the grade relative to the performance of that school.
So it's a lower grade in a poor school. If it's a lower grade in a poor school, you get in, even though at a good school you get higher grades.
But we're not prescribing that for universities. That's the first thing to say. We're saying look at your admissions policies. And let me just say this about Bristol. Bristol have said to me that in adopting these new admissions procedures, they now have the best and brightest bunch of kids they've ever had. So what this is about is seeking out, hunting out talent.
OK, I'm going to bring in some audience here. The man in the second row just here.
My own university, like many others, run foundation year courses to accommodate some of these very individuals who are perhaps not ready to go to university. With the increase in fees, are you not actually inhibiting those very individuals because they're going to have to do 4-year courses and not 3-year degrees?
Well, again, all I can say to you is I hope that the measures we've put in place, no upfront fee, the reintroduction of maintenance grants, making sure people only pay when they earn over £15,000 and then according to what they earn, and no real interest charge, mitigates against this absolutely, I accept, fear of debt. And then what we're doing in schools to improve standards, what we're doing to raise aspirations, all that brought together will ensure that more kids from non-traditional working class backgrounds have the benefit of a university
Masses
education.
of people wanting to come in. Guy here in the front row.
Minister, I wonder where, first of all, you got the 15,000, why that's a perfect figure for someone to start paying back their debt.
It's a better figure.
It seems like you're getting an example from Texas and here. It seems like the government has not really got this right. You need to do more research and really come and tell us what you've got.
Well, it is true, isn't it? Your access regulator was an idea sort of cobbled together at the last moment in the hope of appeasing the Chancellor, who thinks that your system's barking.
Jonathan, can I just say to you, I've been in this job now for whatever it is, 16, 17 months. I've been working at this since I first got in there. I must have looked at 300 different options. Of course, I've looked abroad and looked at what people are doing in other countries. And the 15,000 is better than the 10. And every time you raise the level, there's an additional cost to government. So every time, just all I've got to say to you is we've got to constantly have this terrible, difficult circle to square about the money government puts in and the money we want from graduates. We could have gone to 25,000. That would cost a fortune and probably have made the maintenance grant scheme less generous than we've been able to make it.
The woman in the third row back on the right here.
You keep on talking about the access regulator making it easier for children from more deprived schools and worse schools to get into university. Well, surely that tells you something about the schools and the fact you should be investing in the schools, not in the access regulator. Save your money, invest in the schools, not the access regulator.
What I would say to you is we've got to do both. Of course, we've got to, and we are investing in the schools, and we've got a huge agenda for raising standards in schools, but we equally need to make sure that the universities are fair in their admissions policy as to who they admit to schools, particularly in the new regime, where there are variable fees and there is all this fear around that it'll be money, not merit, that determines access.
The man there, second in the third row back.
Sure, I commend the Minister for what limited measures she's put in place to alleviate the problems of student debt and poorer households. But I'm concerned, obviously, that this is an ill-thought-out measure given the government's seeming intention to sell out higher education further by signing into the General Agreement on Trades and Services. Will the Minister promise now to fight against this access regulator and the subsidy government now gives to universities to be kept out of the GATT agreement and not be regarded as barriers to free trade?
This is a whole other issue, but I can promise you that we are protecting the public interest there, and we will protect
the man who's
interest.
second in, we've only got a little tiny moment left, I'm afraid.
Surely one of the problems is that currently you're laying on the universities the responsibility for dealing with the failure of the whole system and the failure of the secondary schools. Why don't you first start addressing all of the damage and all of the problems caused by bringing in AS and A2s, which made a complete hash of all of last year's university admissions? Deal with that first. Make the universities work, and then maybe we'll be happy to pay for them.
The only thing I'd say, there are 4 things we need to do. We need to raise standards in schools. We need to get kids staying on longer in full-time education and training. We need to get people aiming higher, and we need to ensure a really high-quality university offer which puts young people on the right road to earning good money and enjoying a fulfilling job during the rest of their lives.
Very briefly...
Then it should invest in it instead of...
We are investing in it.
Very briefly, Mandy Telford, are you now encouraged?
No, I think access does need to be looked at. We need more working class children in our universities, but debt is a deterrent, and that'll be my final word.
And Minister, final brief word. You're going to plough on with this regardless of all the hostility?
No, this has been a really tough policy agenda that we've tried to crack. We always do listen, we'll carry on listening, and we know that lots of the issues that have raised are ones that are of real concern to people, and we'll carry on trying to meet most of those as we can.
And you recognise you've got a hell of a hurdle to cross to persuade people like this?
We've got a long road to climb. What is interesting is I think everybody found something they liked in the white paper that we put out.
Thank you very much,
Friday.
Minister. Thanks, everyone. Next Sunday, as Tony Blair returns from his summit with the President, we'll be asking what grounds, if any, would justify war against Iraq. If you'd like to join us in the studio for that, then here's the number. It's 020-7261-3784. Till next week, have a very good afternoon.
Well, at the Royal, the hospital, a heartbeat away from Aidensfield at 8. Then, how do you know a cold-blooded killer from someone who's mentally impaired? A psychologist given a tough case in new drama, State of Mind, at 9.